wine friends. It's Joe from the Wine Educate podcast, where we explore WSET education, study tips, and practical advice for wine enthusiasts and professionals. This is episode 23, and we're going to be talking about primary, secondary, and tertiary aromas and flavors in wine. So I am heading back from the boot camp today. I should be stateside at this point. And if you're interested in knowing when the next boot camp is coming up or other trips, just make sure you are subscribed to the newsletter. That is the best way for me to let you guys know when these trips are coming up. Okay, aromas and flavors in wine are classified into primary, secondary, and tertiary based on their source. So, understanding the aromatic development and being able to identify and label these is crucial for level 3, because in your tasting note, you need to identify them and write them down. And if there is tertiary or lack of tertiary, that is going to define what development is on the nose, whether you say youthful or developing. So we're going to go through them all one by one. And also just to note that a wine can show many different combinations of these things. So often my students say, well, where is the tertiary? I don't see the secondary. And it's okay. Sometimes you get a wine and it's all primary. And sometimes you get a wine and it's all secondary and tertiary, different combinations of things. So this, again, is one of these keep on practicing things, calibrate with your teacher. But the more you taste and try to actually identify what's in the glass, the easier it's going to get. Don't despair. It's easy to get frustrated. This is not something we have been brought up to do on a daily basis, right? To really pay attention to every little thing that we smell around us. So it's going to take some time. Give yourself some time and be patient with yourself. So we have our level 3 SAT card. And if you have that nice laminated one, you can take it with you everywhere. You can tuck it into your tasting binder, so you'll never be without it. And it lists all these aromas and flavors for you. It's very helpful. And it lists them in what are called clusters. So if you look at your card, you'll see like citrus listed. And under citrus, you'll have lemon and lime and grapefruit and so on and so forth. So citrus is the name of the cluster. And then there are the aromas that are within the cluster. So it's really important when you get to level 3 to be specific and not write down the cluster. Because if you just write down citrus, you don't get a point for that. All right. So be mindful of that. Oak, I think, is the one that gives folks the most trouble. They smell oak, they just write oak down. Can't give you a point for that, but please break it up into all those oak aromas. Starting with primary aromas and flavors. So these come directly from the grape variety and fermentation process. So this is straight up what happens after the fermentation. This is before the winemaker does any of their tricks and the things that they can do. What categories do we have here? So like floral, you could have elderflower, violet, rose, chamomile, that green herbaceous notes that sometimes show up, grass, green bell pepper, asparagus, all the fruit aromas and flavors. The red fruits, black fruits, dried, citrus, stone, tropical. There's many on your SAT card. And some other things like spice, black pepper, things like that. Okay, so here's a couple of examples for you. It's difficult to do this via a podcast, honestly, because I'd like to have you in front of me tasting wines with me, but I hope that just solidifying these concepts will be helpful, and then I can send you off into the world and you can taste with your friends, right? Okay, so you have a Sauvignon Blanc. You would expect maybe gooseberry, passion fruit, elderflower. If you had like a Cabernet Sauvignon, so I use a cab in class that I just love to use it, the Fontenay, because it doesn't have any oak. So this is like seeing your Cabernet Sauvignon without its makeup on, right? Without all that oak, you can really get that gorgeous black currant, maybe that green bell pepper and some mint. And then Syrah, also like an unoaked Syrah, will have blackberry, black pepper, and violet. That's 3 things from 3 different clusters there. All right, so those are all examples of primary aromas and flavors. So secondary aromas and flavors are derived from fermentation and maturation choices. So these are all the things that a winemaker has in his or her tool belt, right? All the things that they can do to the wine to add these secondary aromas and flavors. So let's go through the big 3. Lee's influence. So all of these 3 really merit their own separate lesson/podcast. I will do that down the road. I'm just going to give you the quick version of it for today's purpose. When a wine spends time on its lees, either in the tank or in the bottle, it can develop these biscuity, yeasty aromas and flavors. I call it walking into the pastry shop, okay? So you could get biscuit, bread dough, brioche, even this yogurt flavor. When the winemaker has left the wine on its lees, you may pick up on some of these aromas and flavors. Also, malolactic conversion. Malolactic conversion is changing the malic acid into lactic acid. It happens in red wines. All red wines go through this. And for white wines, it's more of a stylistic choice. So some winemakers will just let the wine do whatever it does. But most winemakers will control this process and either encourage it to happen or do things like add sulfur to prevent it from happening. What's happening? So you're converting these harsh, like Granny Smith-like acidity into a softer acidity. So, you've stuck your nose in a wine like a Chardonnay, maybe a Napa Chardonnay, and suddenly you feel like you're eating buttered popcorn at the movie theater. That's malolactic. That's what you're getting, that buttered popcorn, butter, cream, butterscotch sort of influence on the nose. And some wines can go through partial malolactic conversion, and sometimes they go through full malolactic conversion, so some may be more obvious than others. And then we have the one that we really can pick up the most, and that is oak influence. So if a wine was fermented in a barrel or has spent time aging in a barrel, and we know not just barrels, there are other ways out there to get this oak flavor into a wine, aka staves and the chips. It's going to give it that oak flavor. Again, don't write oak, but write vanilla, coconut, smoke, toast, cloves, cedar, all the things, chocolate, coffee, right? Lots of descriptors for oak. And I always encourage my students that don't hold back. Put some things down, okay? Don't just write vanilla. Give me other things to give you points for. So let's talk about some examples of wines that have strong secondary characteristics. Champagne. Champagne spends quite a lot of time on its lees in the bottle. The legal minimum for champagne is 12 months, but most champagnes have their wines stay on the lees for much longer than that. 2 years, 3 years. We had one the other day, 12 years. And that was like a pastry shop explosion of all those things. Really fun and quite delicious. We kind of mentioned it like an oaked Chardonnay. So here you might get a double whammy. And this is a good point to make, that you can get multiple secondary characteristics in the same wine. Don't just think, what is the one secondary characteristic? If you have a Napa Valley Chardonnay, it could very well be showing all 3. It could have the butter from the malolactic fermentation, maybe a little bit of biscuit or bread dough because it spent some time on the lees. And then it could have spent some time in oak and have those vanilla, toast, cedar baking spice aromas as well. Then you've got something like a Grand Cru Classé Bordeaux. You believe that is going to be showing clear oak influence. And you can have a lot of fun writing all of those down. On to tertiary. Tertiary are aromas and flavors that develop due to aging in the bottle or oxidation in oak. So they fall into two different categories there. Your card has lots of nice indications of aging. They split it up, aging for white wine, aging for red wine. So if you have this oxidative maturation, meaning long-term oak aging, you can develop walnut, coffee, and caramel. And if you have this bottle aging, so this anaerobic development, you could get leather, mushroom, tobacco, petrol, honey, all sorts of things. All right, examples of wines with tertiary characteristics. And I ran into this the other day in class. I do realize that we don't all get to sit around and drink wines that are like 30 to 40 years old all the time. That's a treat, really. It's harder for us to spot these things. So my suggestion would be, if you've got your study group going, you all chip in and get yourselves an older bottle to taste together, okay? So if you have an aged Riesling, and I would say an aged Riesling would be way more affordable than some of these older options available. An aged Riesling, you could get petrol, honey, dried fruits, dried apricot. If you have an aged Bordeaux, you get the cedar, tobacco, and earth. And say you're lucky enough to get your hands on a vintage port, maybe from your birth year. You get dried fruit, fig, and nutty aromas. Just really interesting aromas and flavors. I will caution you on just a couple of things here that don't fit neatly into a box and can sometimes trip students up. We talked about botrytis a little bit in our sweetness episode, but one of the aromas and flavors from botrytis is honey. And you're like, well, on my card, Joanne, it says honey is tertiary. I know, it does. But if you have a wine that's been affected by botrytis, it could show aromas and flavors of honey and still be considered youthful, okay? Again, this is a practice thing. If you have a young Sauterne or a young Tokaj, that honeyed note is probably coming from the primary aromas and flavors. And then we have dried fruit, dried and stewed fruit. With wines getting really ripe on the vine, sometimes maybe even like a little overly ripe, you could get these dried, stewed fruit flavors in a wine that is youthful. Think like a Barossa Shiraz. Sometimes I call it Shirazi Shiraz because it's got this almost jammy quality to it. And then some wines are made with dried grapes. So they have this dried and stewed quality from that process, but that is considered a primary aroma and flavor. I know this is a frustrating thing, but again, practice. Because on your level 3 tasting note, if you're getting clear tertiary aromas on the nose, you're going to say it's developing, right? And if you get a wine that doesn't show any tertiary, maybe it shows secondary, but that's fine. Maybe primary and secondary or just primary, but no tertiary, it's going to be youthful. All right. I do hope you find that helpful and not overly confusing. Just keep tasting, all right? And try to taste in a group. Tasting by yourself, this is why people don't drink wine alone. It's fun to drink wine with other people, right? I drink wine alone too. It happens. But it's more fun especially if you're cracking open something interesting, to do it with your tasting group. All right? Please do subscribe to that newsletter to know what's happening with the classes and the trips. I still have some spots available for my level 2 trip this summer, which is going to be great fun. All right. Talk to you guys later. Thanks for listening.